Number 3, second reading of Bill C-22.
Senator Carter.
Honourable Senators, I move that this bill be read a second time.
It is moved by the Honourable Senator Carter, seconded by the Honourable Senator Wu, that this bill be read a second time. On debate, Senator Carter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, last October, as Thanksgiving was approaching, I happened to be in my car listening to a radio phone-in show in Saskatoon. People had been asked to call and share what they were thankful for. One woman phoned in, and when asked, she said, "I am thankful because I have enough. Perhaps I could wish for more or have more, but I have enough to live a fulfilling life, and I'm grateful for that. I have enough." I pulled the car over to the curb and thought about how beautiful a thought this woman had just shared with me. Most of us have enough, certainly financially. I don't know about all of your circumstances, colleagues, but I expect that we all have enough. I do, and I am grateful. But many in this wondrous, prosperous country do not. And today, as we begin consideration of this bill, I hope you will give thought to a part of our population who disproportionately do not, people with disabilities, and how this bill can help. A lot. I rise today in support of Bill C-22, the Canada Disability Benefit Act. This is the beginning of a very special journey for the Senate and for all of us in this chamber. As we work toward building an inclusive society in this country, the commitment to meaningful financial support for people with disabilities is a key component of that foundation, the commitment of a generation. My favorite Gary Larson cartoon, you expected something like this, is a school playground, and in that school playground, a children's slide. At the top of the slide, there is a little boy about to slide down the slide. And at the bottom of the slide are two spiders who've spun a web across the bottom of the slide. And just as the little boy is about to slide down the slide, one spider says to the other, "If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings." Well, this project will not lead to people with disabilities eating like kings, but my guess is that a generation, or maybe even only a few years ago, the hope of people with disabilities of an initiative like this probably felt about equal in prospect as those two spiders. My remarks today will be divided into 5 parts. First, about Bill C-22 as a pillar in the delivery of meaningful change in the lives of people with disabilities in this country. Second, I'll speak briefly about what the disability benefit will provide in alleviating working age poverty for people with disabilities. Third, I'll discuss the content of the bill briefly, what it will achieve, timeframes, and the accountability measures in place to ensure that our government delivers on our collective commitment. Fourth, a bit about the level of support for the bill. And fifth, a somewhat personal conclusion. First, the proposed Canada Disability Benefit is a cornerstone, perhaps the cornerstone, of Canada's Disability Inclusion Action Plan. The action plan is a roadmap to create a more inclusive Canada. It has 4 pillars: employment, so that we can take action to address long-standing barriers in the labor market and workplace. Second, accessible and inclusive communities, so we can address barriers that prevent people with disability from fully participating in their communities. Third, a more modern approach to disability, so that we can address challenges, among other things, in accessing for people with disabilities federal programs and benefits. And fourth, financial security, so that we can reduce poverty and improve financial security for hundreds of thousands of persons with disabilities. This comprehensive approach, a four-legged stool, so to speak, seeks to address what has been decried by so many for so long, the marginalization of people with disabilities. Many have communicated this eloquently. The renowned actress Emma Thompson said it bluntly. Being disabled, she said, should not mean being disqualified from having access to every aspect of life. A basic degree of financial security is not the answer to every aspect of access and inclusion, but without it, access to the basics of life and the chance to experience a fulfilling life is much, much diminished. I'm sure that we all agree that no Canadian with a disability should be living in poverty. And the values that drove past governments of every stripe to reduce poverty and create benefits for seniors and children are the same values that have been used to create the bill before us today. I'm talking about equality, fairness, inclusion, Canadian values, values that guide us and define us as a country and bring out the best in us. These values guided the Government of Canada to create benefits for seniors and children, and those same values guide us today in the creation of the Canada Disability Benefit to help reduce poverty among low-income, working-age Canadians with disabilities. And I note with some pride as a Canadian that the bill before us, committing the government to a meaningful disability benefit, was adopted unanimously in the other place. One of the great things about this country is that though we may have our disagreements, even profound ones, about how the country should be governed and by what principles, we come together, as we so often do, to address the circumstances of our most vulnerable citizens. This is such a time. Mr. Speaker, also a remarkable aspect of this benefit is that it has never been done before. As I understand it, Canada will be the first nation to establish a meaningful income supplement for working-age Canadians with disabilities. Second, briefly, about the living circumstances of people with disabilities, the case, essentially, for Bill C-22. Working-age Canadians with disabilities are among the most financially vulnerable of our citizens. 23% live in poverty, and in some cases, severe poverty. This is more than twice the poverty rate for people of that age group. For people with severe disabilities, the poverty rate is 31%. This is, quite frankly, unbelievable, and I think you would agree, unacceptable in a country such as ours. And this was before the COVID pandemic, when financial vulnerabilities for so many Canadians became even more acute. According to a Statistics Canada survey, last year, 2/3 of respondents with disabilities said they were having trouble making ends meet. 1/3 of respondents with disabilities said their income had dropped because of the pandemic. Well, overall, with the implementation of this bill, we will be able to dramatically reduce the number of working-age Canadians living in poverty. Third, then, the legislation itself. The bill will create the process by which the Canada Disability Benefit will be established and implemented. The proposed legislation will provide a legal framework for the benefit and authorize the Governor and Council to implement the bill's benefit designs through regulation. Though brief, the bill has been subject to intense scrutiny by representatives of the disability community and the so long title, Human Resources and Skills and Social Development and Status of Persons with Disabilities Community, a mouthful, to be sure, HUMA for short in the other place. And in the spirit of nothing about us without us, the disability community has provided extensive advice and commentary to the Minister and her department and to the HUMA committee. HUMA held 6 meetings on the bill, heard from 36 witnesses, received 153 briefs. I have read all of the testimony at these meetings, and I would say that the discussion was universally spirited and constructive, confirming the strong all-party commitment to this bill. This scrutiny led to 9 amendments, each of which I think strengthened the bill, All were adopted by the other place in its unanimous support for Bill C-22. I want to mention the key themes of the bill, and will highlight a number of House amendments as I do. First, in its preamble, the bill makes a powerful commitment to address the financial circumstances of people with disabilities. Let me read 3 of the 10 paragraphs of the preamble. Whereas working-age persons with disabilities are more likely to live in poverty than working-age persons without disabilities because of economic and social exclusion, whereas persons with disabilities often face barriers to employment, including work disincentives such as loss of income and other benefits as a result of becoming employed, whereas Canada aspires to be a world leader in the eradication of poverty, and Parliament, with a view to this objective, enacted the Poverty Reduction Act. You can see the sense of the bill. The bill is then structured mainly around Section 11 to enable the minister to develop regulations to implement the benefit. There is admittedly a limited amount of detail here. The bill identifies the key requirements for these regulations. These are some highlights. The development of eligibility criteria for the benefit, the conditions to be met to receive the benefit, the amount of the benefit, requiring benefits to be indexed to inflation. This was a provision introduced as an amendment at the HUMA committee and adopted unanimously. Developing an application process that is without barriers, a system of reconsiderations, reviews, and appeals. A second amendment to the bill adopted in the other place and before us as part of the bill is the tightening of the focus on adequacy of the benefit. This amendment added Section 11(1.1) to the bill. The provision now reads, in making regulations under paragraph 1C respecting the amount of the benefit, the Governor and Council must take into consideration the official poverty line as defined in Section 2 of the Poverty Reduction Act. While the legislation could have been more prescriptive and detailed on some of these issues, there's something to be said for this work to be done through regulations. It provides a greater degree of flexibility, contributes to the ability to get the disability benefits into the hands of recipients sooner. 2 additional aspects of this issue commend themselves to me, and I hope to you. First, the bill commits the minister to a timely and highly inclusive process involving the disability community in the development of the regulations implementing the benefit. In the spirit of nothing without us, this was another amendment to the bill. The minister's commitment is that the disability community will be involved in every step of the policy and program development regarding the benefit. Second, while there is an element of trust embedded in this commitment, there is also a rich reservoir of trust on the matter, for which Minister Qualtrough deserves a great deal of credit, and which I hope will be respected by all of us. A sign of that reservoir of trust is that a vast majority of the disability community, I have counted, is comfortable with the structure of the bill before us and strongly supports its passage in its present form. A third element of the bill is its time frame. What is critical for people with disabilities is the time within which the benefit will be implemented and benefits become available. This is understandable. Every month of delay leaves hundreds of thousands of Canadians in a state of poverty. Too much time has already elapsed, and I hope that you will, for this reason alone, see value in the urgent consideration of the bill. HUMA heard this message loud and clear. Let me repeat a couple of passages they heard from Rabia Khedr from Disability Without Poverty, and I quote, "If we wait for this legislative process to determine all the details of a perfect bill, it will arrive too late." Krista Carr, the Executive Vice President of Inclusion Canada, a sort of designated disability community leadership asked to work on the financial pillar of disability, said, and I quote, "My final plea to you as members of this committee is that if you truly want to make an historic impact on the lives of people with disabilities in this country, and I know you all do, you'll do everything in your power to ensure that this bill passes as quickly as possible so that we can get this benefit into the hands of people who desperately need it." In my own province, Inclusion Saskatchewan has communicated this same message in its support of the bill. To give effect to this urgency and to put the department's feet to the fire, so to speak, the bill was amended to require a series of reports and deadlines for implementation. 4 key features. The bill comes into force no later than 1 year after it receives royal assent. There must be a report to Parliament within 6 months after coming into force on the commitment to engage with the disability community in the development of regulations. There must be a report back to both houses of Parliament 1 year after it comes into force. And fourthly, after that year, after 3 and then every other 5 years, there must be parliamentary reviews. These provisions will enable Parliament to oversee the bill's implementation, to determine if it's reaching its goal, to change course if needed in the future. I want to speak briefly about one other important dimension of the disability benefit, and one that will present challenges and great opportunity. As many of you know, the provinces and territories presently provide a range of benefits to people with disabilities. The goal of the disability benefit is to build upon existing benefits to meaningfully enrich people's lives. For this reason, it will be critical for the federal government to work with provinces and territories. I'm advised that this work is already underway, to ensure that the provinces and territories sustain their commitments to persons with disabilities. In other words, the Canada Disability Benefit not result in clawbacks of other existing benefits. Indeed, with good cooperation, I'm hopeful that well-integrated supports will further enrich the lives of beneficiaries. For greater transparency, agreements with the provinces and territories are required to be made public, another HUMA amendment. And to that end, I've indicated to the Minister that beyond sponsoring the bill, I'd be willing to help in any way I can in the dialogue with provinces and territories to facilitate optimal outcomes in the best spirit of federal, provincial, territorial cooperation. Fourth is their support for the benefit. Well, the answer is nearly everyone is supportive. First, Canadians in general strongly support the creation of a Canada Disability Benefit. A 2021 Angus Reid survey reported that nearly 9 out of 10 Canadians are supportive. Support for the benefit was also expressed in an open letter to the Prime Minister and Prime Minister from 200 prominent Canadians, including former parliamentarians. Over 50 senators themselves wrote in support. Academics, business and union leaders, economists, health professions, disability advocates have all expressed the same message. And, as I've noted, the bill passed unanimously at third reading in the other place. We'll give the bill meaningful consideration in this chamber and at committee, but the judgment of elected representatives of Canadians and their collective and unanimous judgment deserves, I think, special consideration. Canadians with disabilities themselves have made it clear that this pillar, the financial pillar, financial security, is their most urgent and highest priority. That message was conveyed, I'm advised, unanimously in a range of ways. An online survey to which 8,500 people responded, roundtable discussions with the disability community and with experts, in Indigenous-led consultations on a separate track of consultation, and the other place received an online petition to a similar effect signed by nearly 18,000 people. This is hardly surprising when one considers the statistics mentioned earlier. And each one of those statistics is a person with a disability struggling to cope in really difficult circumstances. Many everyday costs related to a disability are there that are not there for others, including housing, medical expenses, disability supports. And it's not just about the money. Poverty takes a ruinous toll on mental health. Hopelessness, exhaustion, anger, these best describe the emotional turmoil of being a person with a disability with a seemingly no way out of getting out of poverty. So fifthly and finally, to make a long story short, I gave a speech recently and said that, and someone in the audience yelled out, "Too late for that." And if you said it today, you would be right as well. Many parliamentarians in the other place played a meaningful role in bringing this legislation to us. MPs Bonita Zarillo and Michael Maurice in particular. But I'd like to especially acknowledge the work and efforts of the Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Disability Inclusion in getting us close to the finish line. As Minister Qualtrough said in the other place, the ultimate goal is to improve the lives of hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities. This is the kind of Canada we are, the kind of Canada we should always do our best to be. In closing, I want to take a moment to personalize my remarks. I want you to think about someone you know. And we all know someone, a friend, an acquaintance, a family member with a disability. The struggles they face, the challenges they must overcome, often with your love and support, the strength and perseverance they show just to survive in an often unwelcoming world. My daughter Kelly and her friends come to mind as heroes to me in this respect. Someone once said, wisely I think, sometimes the things we cannot change end up changing us for the better. That's so with my daughter Kelly and so many of her friends. I'm grateful for that, and I know to be the case for so many of you in the relationships you have in the world. Now, in my family, we are fortunate. My daughter won't need this benefit to manage in the world. She is nevertheless a great champion of what we are doing in the Senate today and in the days ahead. And I would not want it or her to be any other way. Some anonymous person once said, I wouldn't change you for the world, but I would change the world for you. Well, in a meaningful way, we have a chance to do just that. To change the world for hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens who really need us. What an opportunity, what an honor. With that, colleagues, I respectfully ask you to consider and pass this legislation in timely fashion. Thank you. Merci.
Senator Bovey, you have a question?
I have a question. Senator, I wonder if you'd take a question.
I'd be pleased to, Senator.
Thank you for sponsoring this bill. I think it's a very important one, and you and I have talked about some of the issues our colleague Canadians face. You mentioned that the federal-provincial agreements are to be made so there won't be clawbacks. I wonder if you can confirm that with the discussions you've had with the ministers. You know, I've been working with one young person with a contract from my office, and it was to be clawed back by the Manitoba government by 2/3. We managed to extend the contract, so it was only clawed back by 1/3. And I fear what we're paying is far from close to a living wage. So I would really appreciate more discussion, if you can, about what ceasing these clawbacks would be, so that the federal funds can really top up their financial situations.
Senator Cotter.
Thank you for the question, Senator Bovey. I know that you and many other senators in this place and members of Parliament in the other place often are working on an individualized basis to assist people with disabilities to minimize their vulnerability and enable them to get ahead in the world. The messages I hear from the minister and her office are that a kind of a line in the sand is no clawbacks. Now, each province, as you will know, a lot of this has been delivered through provincial jurisdictions. These will be direct payments to people within federal authority. A lot of the provincial regimes differ from one another. In some places, the situation you described could exist, but in another province, perhaps it doesn't. but something else might create a challenge, that the receipt of money triggers other unfortunate moderations and consequences. So I think those will probably end up being negotiated on a individualized Canada provincial, Canada territorial basis in order that the FIT achieves that goal of essentially no clawbacks, no loss as a result of the generosity of this benefit, which will be significant in dollar terms when it's put together. So I can't tell you more in detail except this kind of line in the sand commitment on the part of the federal minister, and I'm supportive of that. And as I've said, if there are ways that I can help her and help provincial leaders to make that fit together, I'm keen to do it, and I think it will be a success, and I hope it will occur in a really timely way. Your passage of this bill will unlock that process officially. Thank you.
Senator Cotter, I have three more senators who wants questioned. Are you willing to answer
I'd be pleased
question?
to, yes.
Okay. Can we do it, and then we'll come back. Senator Duncan, followed by Senator Forêt, followed by Senator Dowd.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cotter, for your sponsorship of this bill, and I appreciate the intent, and as you've so eloquently described, and have full respect for our colleagues in the other place. And my question, because you mentioned in your speech that you've poured over all the documents and the testimony and so on, and poured through the bill, my question is, where in the federal, provincial, territorial consultations does the workers' compensation boards, which are independent of government, fit? I'm thinking of a long-term claimant with something, say a diagnosis of PTSD, where sometimes you'll get the workers' compensation board saying, no, you're fit to return to work. And the client, or your benefits, we're done. You've reached the limit. And yet a doctor would still constitute that person with a disability. Would this be of assistance to them? Is this subject to the clawback? Where does that fit, that consultation fit?
Senator Cotter.
Briefly, and I'm not very knowledgeable on the specifics about the link with workers' compensation, but I do know that there has been consultation and dialogue with, let me call it, the insurance industry. When you think about workers' compensation as a kind of a form of insurance, and workers and employers pay into it, to try to figure out the intersection there as well. And the minister and her office have advised me that they have identified that and have been working to try to ensure that people are not damaged by the benefit that they would get here, and it would not undermine benefits to which they're legitimately entitled in other ways. I will make a further exploration about the workers' compensation point, because I think it's a very good one.
Thank you.
Senator Forêt.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. Madam Speaker. First of all, I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for having agreed to sponsor this very important bill. My concern is a bit peripheral to the bill because, first of all, we're talking about defining the conditions of admission, and sometimes the devil is in the details, and I do hope that we will be able to deliver this supplementary information. In listening to you, my concerns are that indeed there are persons with disabilities who in their situation benefit greatly from the support and love in their entourage, and you are a living example of that. But we know that in Canada there are over 10 million people who produce no tax statements, and so many of those people are isolated, disabled, and they are the most fragile vulnerable members of our society. That's not at the heart of your bill, but I wonder, will we be able to set up certain tools to be able to identify these people, because we can't currently reach them. We don't know where they are. They're lost in administrative limbo since they don't file tax statements. These are the most fragile people in today's society.
Thank you, Senator Foy. It's a very legitimate question and an important one. One provision of the bill provides access to the bill's implementation and delivery to income tax information. So people who are obtaining tax credits, for example, will be able to be identified. You are right that there is a kind of a black hole of people disconnected from government in all kinds of ways, largely through their impoverished circumstances and disability. And I think the bill will, if not fail, it will not achieve its objectives unless it can reach out to those people. What has happened with respect to this bill and the conversations that have been going on for, too long, really, in the last couple of years in particular, is that the disability communities at the national, provincial, local level are unbelievably engaged with this bill. And I hope, perhaps with support from the government, the way in which outreach can be made to those folks so that they will know about the bill. There's a commitment in here that making application and the like is intended to be disability barrier-free. So hopefully it will be possible through that kind of outreach. And speaking from my own personal experience with Inclusion Saskatchewan, with whom I've worked a little bit over the last number of years, it feels to me in a really lovely way that they have their fingers into, I don't want to say every family in Saskatchewan that has someone with a disability, but I think the local communities know, and their commitment to this bill is so powerful that it won't be a perfect success, but I think it will be a far greater success than one might think sitting in Ottawa reflecting about it. Thank you.
Senator Down, followed by Senator Dalphon, Klein, and Pate. Senator Down.
Thank you, Senator, for your speech, and like you, I support the bill. I think it's much needed. I am, however, concerned whenever there's unanimous legislation from the House of Commons, and I base that on, unfortunately, years of experience of what I call their manic behavior. We had the recent pension bill here that for years the House of Commons refused to support, and suddenly it's unanimous. It's our job, as you know, to not delay this legislation, but to make sure that it's fundamentally sound in the implementation. And I mentioned the Veterans Charter when I was first appointed. House of Commons spent two and a half minutes in total on the legislation, sent it to us. We sent it to Finance. We didn't even send it to Veterans Affairs. Who doesn't want to assist the men and women who served our country? We passed it only to find out years later from the Parliamentary Budget Officer that it shortchanged our veterans by millions and millions of dollars they would have received if it had not been changed. So further to the question recently asked, the Guaranteed Income Supplement is an excellent example of a valid program, but the implementation, many of us worked on it for years. You had to file income tax. Well, if you don't owe any taxes, you don't have to file income taxes. And in my home province, hundreds of low-income seniors were not getting a benefit they were entitled to because they didn't want to pay somebody $50 to file their income tax when they didn't have the skill sets. I think, and the question is, would you share my concern that notwithstanding the many people saying, pass this, it's very important the Senate committee will do the work that often the House of Commons committees do not, and make sure that we have a superb program with all the wrinkles out of it before we pass this legislation.
Senator Cotter.
I agree entirely with the sentiment you've expressed, Senator Down. The challenge is to put that together in an organized way, but in this context, the bill proposes that be done through regulation. So we will not be able to get a very significant parliamentary oversight of that process. It's intended to be done in as transparent a way as possible, but the construction of it, I think, will reside in regulations. The result, can I just finish this last observation? The result is, I think, that we need to be comfortable and satisfied, and this is our job, I think, that the markers are right in this bill. I think they're pretty good. You may identify some that could be better, but it is consciously intended to be a framework, and to be frank about it, that places a significant degree of trust in the ministry and the officials to put it together. I think there's quite a bit of trust that I'm prepared to repose there. And the nice additional thing is this commitment that the disability community will be engaged with that process every step of the way.
Honourable Senators, I still have 6 senators who wants to ask a question. Senator Down, I'll put you on second round. Senator Dalphon.
Senator Dalphon. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Senator Cotter, for this most interesting speech. In anticipating your speech, I read the bill closely, and you just used a word that struck me, and that was the word framework. A framework to arrive at something. And I noted that the bill is to enter into force for a maximum of 12 months once it is adopted. I also noted that the government must report on its consultations within 6 months of the entry into force of the bill, and that the government must table in both chambers a report on the proposed regulations in the year following the entry into force of the bill. So we're already talking about possibly a 2-year period. In your conversations with the department, did you discuss a realistic time frame for the first checks to arrive to the beneficiaries? Because I suspect that within the next 2 years there will be another election.
In one respect, if I may say, Senator Dalphon, the occurrence of an election will be rendered somewhat irrelevant because the framework will be in place and the department will carry on putting the program together. I hate to use that golf analogy, but I'm a 30 handicap at predicting elections, and so I'm happy that I think is off to the side. I think the message that I keep hearing, and it's informal and nobody's prepared to make an absolute commitment, is that it will be possible to do the negotiations, hopefully, and put the regulations in place in 12 months. And once that happens, I think benefits can begin to flow. There will be an application process as the bill is presently constructed, so it does mean that people will have to apply. But the language that people talk about is sort of a 12-month period, and I hope that's correct. I hope that's the longest it is. And Senator Down is right that we have an important job to do. I think we need to do it in as timely a way as possible, because my feeling is that each month that goes by pushes the time by a month, and that means some tens of thousands of Canadians remain in poverty for one more month. And the best we can do on that, I think, is really important for them. Thank you.
Senator Klein, followed by Senator Pate. Senator Klein.
Senator Cotter, take a question. Senator Cotter, I have to harken back to the days of COVID and money's going out in CERB payments and top-ups on the social assistance and such. And there was a significant problem in some provinces, territories, where they did claw back on the social income assistance side of things, which was tragic, really. And I want to support this bill. I'd like to see it to go to the people that are eligible for it and not to help the provinces and territories balance their books. And I think one of the problems with the last time was that it took a while for someone of authority, whether it was the minister responsible or the Prime Minister himself, to tell these provinces and territories this is intended for people with a disability and not for any other purpose, and not to get a claw back. And he needs to get some, or she needs to get some agreement in that place that it is not clawed back, because otherwise we're going to be providing false hope. And just by citing this bill under consideration is providing hope. Let's make sure it's not false hope.
Mr. Cotter.
Thank you, Senator Klein. I took this out of my speech, and so maybe I'll just shove it back in and answer to you, if I may. I worked as you know, as a deputy minister in a provincial government for 12 years. And when Ottawa steps forward and provides support for a program or initiative, it's a natural consequence that provincial departments look for ways in which that can generate savings for themselves. Provincial finance departments have that expectation. It's almost like the law of gravity in a way. For a bill like this, that seems to me, bad faith, if I could put it that way. This initiative is to try to help among the people with the greatest needs in our country, and So I'm fully supportive of the minister's message, and I don't know every little trick that provinces tend to do, and it's not exactly illegitimate in general terms. Provinces have financial obligations to their people, and rightly so, to us, in our own provincial worlds. In this case, I just think it would be dishonorable, and it's important to minimize and ideally eliminate that happening in every respect. And to the extent that I can be helpful on that, I've indicated a willingness to talk with people and examine the programs that we can make sure stay in place at the provincial level. So I entirely agree with the modest degree of anxiety that you have identified. Thanks.
Senator, I'll put you on the second round. Senator Pate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would you take another question, Senator Cotter?
I certainly would, Senator
Right.
Pate.
As you're no doubt aware, I was along with Senator Petitclerc, one of the initiators of the letter that went from 50 senators, in large part because the government was not acting as they had promised and had been indicated in the previous budget. I have no doubt in the faith and the intention of the minister in this respect. I do have significant concerns, however, that one of the main issues raised by disability groups initially, and then they were, my understanding is, pushed off to, and some would say pressured to be silent on this issue. Experts also, legal experts also say a key issue that isn't in the bill is adequacy. While there's a royal recommendation, when that was raised in the other place, it was deemed out of scope, which seems, as Senator Down and others have said, seems a little odd when the focus is on bringing people out of poverty and, as you've indicated, trying to ensure that people with disabilities not just have enough, but that they have an opportunity to thrive in this country. So I'm curious as to how you see us best able to support this process, given all of these issues, given the many questions you've already been asked around clawbacks and adequacy, access. How you see us addressing that particular issue when it's very clear that legal experts seem to agree that our failure to include adequacy could be one of the key, and the many courts that have said, unfortunately, we keep asking people with the least to keep dragging the government back to court to enforce actions, what we can do best to ensure that that's in there, given the limitations on our ability with respect to fiscal challenges.
Senator Cotter.
Just briefly, beyond trust, which is, I have quite a reservoir with respect to this bill, I accept your point, and I would have been myself probably happier if an amendment had occurred in the other place that made that a little bit stronger. I think it will still get delivered on. On the question of it being ruled out of scope, I'm again out of my depth. Senator Seidman, who's a critic on the bill, she and I have talked about the significance and meaning of that. I think that's deserving of exploration. I just hope it gets done in a timely way. And the question of whether there is a need for the bill to be strengthened along those lines and how that can be done gets meaningful consideration at committee. I would be happy, and I am happy with the bill in its present form, but of course that's a call for all senators to make.
Senator Bellemare.
Senator Bellemare, thank you, Madam Speaker. Microphone, please. The interpreter cannot hear. This is, here's my question, however. How will we move forward with a bill that goes through regulation? How will persons with disabilities have the assurance that they will receive adequate income? Because the bill is fairly vague in its parameters. And the question that came to my mind was, why haven't we chosen to have a shared costs program, where the costs are shared with provinces to ensure that there really will be the delivery of adequate benefits? Senator Cotter.
I don't have a complete answer on that, Senator Bellemare. On the question of negotiating shared cost initiatives, those are complex, as you know. My guess is that there's a time for that. My experience in a provincial government was that there are times when the government of Canada wants to move, let me say the phrase unilaterally, to do a good thing, and direct payments are often a model that are embraced in that respect. There are days in the province when I would have liked a different approach, but this seems to be an attractive and more immediate response. It does require work to make sure that the provinces don't take advantage of the initiative, because we are talking about, I don't know how much, but a lot of money here that will make its way to people with disabilities. It will actually infuse provincial economies, because people with disabilities, are disproportionately at lower areas of the income status of stratosphere of Canada, and they tend to spend the money not on trips to Hawaii or Palm Springs, but to pay their rent and food and support their families and try to make ends meet. So there will be benefits out there, and I think the idea is to try to get them quickly, and shared cost programs would have been a bit of a challenge. It's also a little bit more complicated here, because it wouldn't be a green field that you would start with, but the situation where the provinces have their own, and some disparate, in fact no two the same. So each one of those would require a careful and lengthy dialogue. It's going to be challenging enough as it is. Thank you.
Senator Cotter, I have 3 senators on the second round. If you wish to ask 5 more minutes to answer these questions.
I'd be happy to ask for 5 more minutes, and I'll try to provide briefer answers.
Do we have an agreement for 5 minutes? 5 minutes. Senator Bovey, followed by Senator Down and Senator Klein.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Senator Cotter, and I'll be very brief. I think the words you used in your speech when you were going over the bill itself, you talked about the fact that there be provisions for reconsiderations, reviews, and appeals. Were those the right words, and are those in the cases of people being denied the benefit?
Senator Cotter.
I have just pulled out the language here. So one of the provisions reads, and I quote here, regulations respecting, this is sub H of section 11 sub 1, respecting reviews or reconsiderations of decisions made under the Act, and then sub I, respecting appeals. So that there's an expectation that a model of reconsideration will be put in place, and also a arrangement for an appeal process.
Senator Down.
Thank you, Senator, for taking so many questions. I think the number of questions are a reflection of the passion senators have to get this legislation absolutely correct. You talked in response to my earlier question about the framework and the regulations. And I think it's very, very important, and I'm wondering if you share my view, that at the committee, that senators on that committee are able to nail down with the officials from the various government departments exactly how they intend to proceed. It's been my experience that the more we have on the record, the more we can pursue after the fact if they're not doing what they said they would do. And like you, I have a lot of trust that this is going to proceed, but as the accountants like to say, I like to trust and verify, and I think that's a way to do that. And I hope, given your background, you would be well suited to do that on the committee as well. And are you thinking along those lines as opposed to generic general questions when it gets to committee?
Senator Cotter.
I agree with your observations, Senator Down. This is I'm really honored to be connected with this bill in a meaningful way, and I want to be as fully participatory as I can and helpful to see it produce the best result. So, thank you.
Senator Klein, you had a second question?
Well, I do. I have trust in the minister as well, and but again, I have to harken back to in 2022 when the Saskatchewan government clawed back payments from people with disabilities. I think we'll see a repeat unless we have some type of form of agreement before we go forward with this. And I don't want to stall it. I don't want to see it slowed down. But we need some assurance, I think, to make sure that this goes to where it's intended. And I do want to see that happen. Anything I can say or do, please call on me.
Senator Cotter.
I'm desperate not to run out of that 5 minutes. Senator Black and our Ag Committee often puts up his hands to get us to stop, and I was hoping that wouldn't happen here. The positive feature of this is that those agreements need to be negotiated and made public, so that it's a requirement in the bill. It was an amendment, so you and I will be able to have a look at those agreements and see whether they are rich enough and strong enough to achieve the goals that you and I are looking for here. It will occur after the bill is passed, but it probably has to be in that fashion. I don't think we have too many other options, but at least we get a good look to see whether the expectations and the commitments of the minister, and a kind of, as to the extent that I'm making any kind of a commitment, my commitment to you, and I think people with disabilities will get honored. We can verify or unverify. Thank you.
Senator Seidman.
Adjournment of the debate.
It's moved by the Honourable Senator Seidman, seconded by the Honourable Senator Martin, that further debate be adjourned until the next sitting of the Senate. Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion?
Carried.